Hello, and welcome to another spoiler episode of Umineko. I will be giving huge spoilers for the whole game. This is the last video about episode 1, but do know that I will talk about everything. This episode will even include some Higurashi spoilers. I myself am literally at the halfway point of that game, so I couldn't give full spoilers, but I will be talking a little bit about some stuff there. Some of it's going to be stuff I don't actually know the answers to, so it's a little bit speculative, but it does bring in information that you wouldn't know if you've never played it. For this video, I do want to dig into the mystery whodunit stuff first, because I think there's some thematic jump-off points I want based on the answer to the mystery. And by all accounts, I got a decent amount of things correct, but there's some key stuff I got wrong. So going through the comments on the previous video, one key thing that is a red truth from later. So I haven't been reading the red truths ahead, but one thing I do remember is that one of the red truths will eventually say that the red truths are not episode specific. Generally speaking, I think there are some that refer to specific situations, but then broadly speaking the red truths are applicable overall. And they're just declarative. They are fixed points. One of them is that Genji, Nanjo, and Kumasawa are not murderers. So, of course, that would mean that, in fact, no, Genji did not kill most of the people, as I kept asserting that he did. So because of this, the second Twilight onwards would have to have been Beatrice in the body of canon. As for the first Twilight, this is a thing I completely did not catch in the slightest, but that was flagged in the comments. Eva and Hideyoshi were culprits. They were roped in to the mystery, basically brought in on it as a kind of scam. In the comments, it was speculated that they were basically told that all of the bodies were doubles, and that Shannon's body was a fake, and that Shannon's body was not even a body, but was just a vague shape made to look like one, with only culprits able to see the body itself very clearly, and preventing anyone from getting close enough to see it. This is why Hideyoshi is the one who describes it and prevents George from getting close and has to tell him about the ring that he can see on the finger, etc. I didn't at all see their involvement, but knowing that Hideyoshi and Eva are part of the narrative makes a lot more sense in terms of their motivation. The way Eva is so flippant with Natsuhi in general, but especially with the gun, and the way Eva is so aggressive, she is generally like this, but it makes more sense if you read this behavior as she doesn't actually think murders have happened. She thinks that they are basically pulling one on Natsuhi, with the knowledge that Kinzo is dead, not by murder, but just because he is actually dead, and they're trying to wrangle that information out of Natsuhi. A key point, which is not something I copped to at any point, Natsuhi's gun is not loaded. Canon gives her the gun, gives her an unloaded gun, which is very good, and thematically I'll talk about that shortly. But Eva does know this, and that's a key part of why she is so aggressive in that scene. And in retrospect, that does make sense, because as much as Eva is very spiky and like will go on the offensive early and will like lash out at other people, she does have a legitimate fear of death in the other episodes. A key part of the mysteries of this game is you need to think about people's motivations and people's inner lives and feelings in that sense. We'll see Eva being scared later. We will see her react very unfavorably to these situations. However, in this one, I remember clocking them getting up early and thinking of that as a way to intentionally make Natsuhi seem rude and a bad host. And now I understand it's actually part of a whole murder game that Eva and Hideyoshi have been roped into. And from the jump, they're very confident, they're very relaxed. They obviously go, whoa, dead bodies, this is crazy. But if you think about it, they never truly seem that afraid. I did I did flag how Ava seems very quick to jump to turning the situation to her own advantage. And of course that's because she's a part of the narrative. She is a player of the game. She has a script. And it might even be her going off script to then say, but really what I ultimately want is the thing I want and not what I'm being instructed to do. Because she would not listen to the instructions of furniture very favourably, only as far as it seems to actually benefit her. And one of the things in the comments is that a lot of the servants get very anxious in the scene where she is goading Natsuhi into trying to shoot her, because if Natsuhi actually pulled the trigger, then it would go very badly, because then it would be very clear that the gun was not loaded. Those being the important points here, I want to talk about two thematic jumping off points from there. First of all, the non-loaded gun is actually such a good thing to put in Natsuhi's hands, because she has a lot of confidence and security, and everyone feels safe. Everyone feels safe about the idea of being able to defend themselves from a culprit because they have a gun, but the gun is not loaded. And part of the gun not being loaded is that Natsuhi doesn't know how to use a gun. She doesn't know to check it's loaded. She doesn't have that kind of know-how. Because a gun feels like an instant win device in some ways. In fiction it is often, once you have a gun trained in someone, you've got the upper hand and you have control of a situation. But a key part of this whole episode is that Beatrice is controlling the situation. The Urshiromiya family is completely out of control. They have had the tables turned on them, and at every step of the way they get manipulated and maneuvered around, including the people who are accomplices, Ava and Hideyoshi, believing themselves to be in control of a situation only to then be murdered at the second twilight. Speaking of, the fact that Ava and Hideyoshi are also culprits only furthers my understanding of, at least in this episode, what Beatrice is doing is to show the inner nature of the Ushiromiyas. In this situation, they can turn on each other so easily. They're so willing to fight and squabble. She's showing just how petty and self-serving they are. If Ava or Hideyoshi just said, absolutely not, no we are not doing this, then the whole thing falls apart straight away. It's interesting to me that a lot of the mysteries of this first episode are dressed up as magic, but are quite simply solved if you just believe that people are lying. If you choose to distrust how many people? I'm not even going to count Shannon because that's not really the case in this situation, but if you distrust Genji, Kanon, Kumasawa, Nanjo, Ava, and Hideyoshi, 1/3 of the people on this island, not even including the part where Kinzo is dead and then Natsuhi is hiding that, and you'd also have to distrust her to fully unpack what's happened here. You would have to believe that 6 of the 18 people on this island are lying to you to varying extents, even before you get to the part of believing that they're murderers. And that is a very simple explanation to what happened. And we will see later how Battler does not want to accept that explanation because he wants to trust in the people around him. And it's interesting that by the end of the game's subtext as a whole is about trusting in people. Not necessarily wholly blind trust, because we're going to see some shitty people, and we've already seen some shitty people. But the game, by the end, is kind of insinuating, to my read anyway, that you should err on the side of being trusting. So it's interesting to me how this one is going the other way, and is basically saying that if Battler literally was willing to distrust the people that he thought he was safe with, then he could very easily solve, this literally impossible closed room with Ava and Hideyoshi is because actually it wasn't closed and they just lied about it. The simplest explanation in the world, but it requires something Battler will not give up. And what's funny about that is Battler can't acknowledge Canon as being a liar. Battler has barely even met Canon. It's not even that these are relationships that stretch back years into the past. Battler simply wants to deny the notion of people being like this at all. And to me, this is somewhat of a parallel to the way in which they gloss over the abuse of Kinzo, they gloss over Kinzo's abuse, Rosa's abuse, the different ways in which their parents are doing shitty things, and they see no choice but to accept it, and not only accept it, but then gloss over it. Because you can see the ways in which the adults of this island are bad people, especially at times, but to Battler there is a different threshold with the murders that simply is inconceivable and incompatible. Again, his fixation on the idea of the lawlessness of the witch sets up a kind of binary idea that you can be a good person, and good person can include nice Aunt Rosa, who's the cool aunt even if she slaps her child a lot. And bad people are people who break laws. But I also know that Battler's dad literally does illegal business practices. The reason he needs money is because he's being sued for doing illegal things. And this is not to say that necessarily business crimes or abuse are on par with murder, but that Battler has compartmentalized these things differently and refuses to acknowledge and in certain ways refuses to acknowledge the flaws in his family. As someone who left because of having trouble with his father, he still can't actually acknowledge just how rotten parts of the Ashuramia family are. With that surprisingly long preamble, it's time to talk about the tea party. So, this is our final part from the videos, and it's quite dense in certain ways. So in the tea party, one thing that is fun to read in retrospect, knowing the full extent of this game, is the part where they say, so what, this is basically like a bad ending? And we're like, yeah, no, that must have been a bad ending. I guess if we solved the epitaph, things might have gone differently. Boy, things really could have gone differently. And in fact, someone does solve the epitaph and they go differently. We'll dig later into, many months later, into what likely actually happened on the island, given who we know did survive. And that'll be easier to kind of puzzle out when I have a better handle on what actually literally true information we have about who is where and so forth. But a thing that I like in reading this section is, I don't know if I'd personally say it's that bad an end. Knowing that in a certain sense, the literal outcome is fixed. I mean, there's only one body count possible. Only 2 people are getting off this island. With those facts being immutable, I'm glad Beatrice won. To be honest, she should get that win. Here's where I'll have some broad Higurashi spoilers, where I will need to speculate about Higurashi having only played through the end of episode 4. This will be... I'm working my way through that and will hopefully be done with it soon enough to have more informed opinions about the next tea party, but an interesting contrast between Umineko and Higurashi. In Higurashi, as far as I can tell, you are actually changing events in an attempt to get a better outcome. Who you is, who's changing events, all that stuff. That's still up in the air. I'm not going to try and build a theory on all that now. We're here for Umineko, not Higurashi. But the trajectory of that game seems to be trending towards trying to fix a thing or avoid a thing in a way that Umineko just can't be. Umineko is a cat box, but it's actually a cat box with a deterministic output. We know who got off this island. At the end of the game, we're going to have a definitive answer that 2 bodies escaped. And no more, no less. The cat box part is what happened between the time when the rest of the Ashura arrived on the island, and those 2 people left. That's the question mark. The middle part is unclear, undefined, which feels relevant to, from the question mark Tea Party, when Baron Castell talks about the kind of magic Beatrice has, and Beatrice's general approach to magic. Feels like this whole notion of a deterministic outcome but an unknown midpoint, and that being a thing you can endlessly reshuffle. It feels like it matches the description of Beatrice never really letting go of the dice. But we'll get to that at the end with our discussion of Baron Castell and Beatrice. This does seem an appropriate time to talk about authorship. So one of Umineko's broad overall themes is the idea of authorship. It is about writing stories. This gets a little bit easier to parse and talk about when we start to have more episodes where we can dissect the differences and the tone and the voice they are written with. But even in this Tea Party now, we've already gotten a contrast that is interesting. It's most notable when you look at the descriptions, the narration that's not anyone's dialogue. The voice clearly has a certain contempt for Battler and a fondness for magic, Beatrice, and Maria in particular. The Tea Party in an abstract sense does seem to be authored by Maria. I don't think the Tea Party has any actual in-universe representation. In the end scroll, there's a reference to the fact that they found notes written by Maria, or at least signed by Maria. But when I refer to Maria as an author of the Tea Party, I mean purely in the sense of, as a viewpoint, we are getting Maria's take and perspective on these things. In a way that in the main episode, you are kind of getting Battler's point of view. Even in scenes where Battler is not there, the voice is similar. There's a little bit of omniscient third person that comes in, especially in Battler's absence. But in general, the cadence, the kind of style of narration still fits. You just get a little bit more of a personal insertion of Battler's feelings, experiences, and knowledge when he is physically present in a scene. But it being written from Battler's point of view does not mean Battler wrote it. The first 2 episodes, now, I'm fairly sure this is correct, but please correct me in the comments if I've gotten this wrong or even just slightly wrong. Because the ending scrolls reference the first episode being discovered in a bottle. Just cast out to sea, drifted on shore, and people found it and went, holy shit, here's what happened on Ashura. That was the writing of Beatrice. This was Beatrice writing a narrative, planning out what could happen on the island, what she could do as her revenge on the Ashura family. Her Saw movie, basically, showing them their own flaws and their own narrow minds. Episode 2 is going to be much the same. There may be an additional wrinkle that I'm not remembering, but it is again written by Beatrice and cast out. Both of these exist in a way that complicates people's understanding of this weekend, because you have 2 entirely separate accounts, and you have to wonder how these would be done. How could they have been written live and cast out? Who could have done this? It must have been the witch. It was Beatrice writing these in advance. This was Beatrice drafting a story. Now this is where we talk about authorship. This is the equivalent to literally a person writing their murder mystery, and then episode 2 is their second draft, where you tighten things up, you kind of get around some of the obvious questions people have. We can get into this more in episode 2, but Battler, in some ways, during this story, is going to be a very bad reader, where he's asking all the wrong questions, he's making all the wrong kind of assertions that undermine the plot, because instead of accepting things, he's trying to go around things to find a backdoor. When Battler starts talking about maybe the murders were done with a special sort of mechanism, it is missing the point so hard. Because instead of engaging with the story on the terms it is actually laying out, instead of listening to what the story is communicating and what it is suggesting about how he is thinking and how he is not thinking, Battler instead says, yeah, but what if it's some bullshit trick with like a spring-loaded trap that's just completely undetectable and leaves no hints and leaves no evidence whatsoever? Which is the worst way to try and talk to a mystery author who has pored over their story and has left you clues and has given you hints and directed you in certain ways, for you to then just disregard all of those and go, you probably just made up some bullshit. That's probably all it is. Definitely couldn't be the thing you keep telling me it is. Magic's not real. And one thing that is interesting to note about this kind of authorship, and I don't know if we've actually talked about this in any of the spoiler episodes, but all of the character descriptions seem to have been written by Maria. Because you can often see her trademark laugh. And they're definitely written in Maria's voice, especially when you look at Rosa's death description, where it refers, I believe, even refers to her as Mama, but definitely has the kind of affection Maria has for her mother. It's pretty clear that it is her and not Battler. And that's going to be an interesting thing to look at going forward, especially as we get little character bios of demons or other interdimensional beings, especially as we get into Tea Party sections set in the real world as Angie interacts with magic. There's a whole layer of meaning to figuring out whose perspective on these characters we're getting. And that will really round out these characters, because another key understanding of Umineko is that people are not fixed identities. People are very flexible in who they are, and people's differing perspective on an individual really varies, even from within the same family, perhaps. So, to continue through the tea party, Jessica asks a question when she notes that Maria believed in Beatrice from the very beginning, but why were people still being killed? I think it's important to understand Beatrice's overall motivation. Beatrice is not simply looking to have someone believe in her, because she already has that. Maria has no trouble believing. But Beatrice knows, at least in this episode, Beatrice is fatalistic about never being accepted broadly. It does not mean much to have some people being supportive if, at the end of the day, even one person will stubbornly deny your existence. That one person destroys the magic. That is just inevitable, and we have seen Battler literally do that in this episode. Battler fails the test where he could have accepted Beatrice, or even could have been more open-minded to Beatrice, and he jumps straight to the kind of denial that Beatrice fears would always be there. And so while Maria believing is good, it does not actually move the needle, because the problem is the people who don't believe and refuse to under any circumstances. And in a certain respect, that's part of why Battler's stubbornness makes him a good opponent. A thing that you'll notice happens as every character starts to dissolve in the tea party is that Jessica reveals she did not really believe. Jessica went along with what other people said, but once the magic starts fading, her final words are insisting to Battler to never give in. She gave in because it seemed comfortable, because with everything going on, it was just the way to make things okay. But once the illusion starts breaking, it's clear that she was not really a believer. She did not accept Beatrice, but she was willing to go along with it. In that sense, Battler being stubborn makes him a useful opponent for Beatrice, because if Beatrice can actually make Battler accept her existence, that's a pretty good indication that she could get anyone to accept her existence. Even Jessica, who might be an easy sell to go along with things, but would take something more to genuinely believe. Battler has a funny moment right before Beatrice appears, where he says, "Just show me a witch. That's all you gotta do, then I'll believe." Then Beatrice appears and he promptly immediately says, "This is still some trickery bullshit, I don't believe anything." But a line I'm more interested in is, he says that real miracles happen, whether he believes in them or not. They don't require his participation. And I don't have an answer to this, but I'm curious what Battler thinks a miracle is. It's not because he may have some internally consistent definition that would make sense, but I don't know what this word is supposed to indicate to us in this setting, in this conversation. What does he think of as a miracle, and how is that distinct from magic? Just like logic and magic are just names for ways of explaining things. There is no categorical difference between a miracle and magic that you could point at, to me at least, that would make them just unequivocally different. People could have spent this whole weekend referring to the closed room as a miracle, and as far as Battler is concerned, that would still be as true as anything else I could imagine him calling a miracle. His insistence that a miracle is an immutable thing that does not require his participation is effectively him trying to assert a kind of objective reality. A miracle is a miracle. It is not affected by his perception or his subjective judgments, it just is. This is in keeping with Battler's general logic and argument style, but it's not really reflective of the world because, as we know, these things are not immutable. Everything is mediated by a subjective understanding and view of it. Shannon and Canon both exist. There is only one body between them, but they do both exist. Battler would not question this, but if asked about it devoid of context, would definitely insist that this isn't a real thing and one of them is a disguise in some sense. So you can't realistically say that there is a thing that is a miracle that is irrelevant to the person observing it, and that, conversely, the person observing it does not affect the miracle. It is not a miracle if it is not being believed in by people. Because then it's a trick, or a mystery, or a strange, unexplained event. But a miracle is something that people have faith in. Battler at one point spins the chessboard around and says that the reason Beatrice is so vehement on getting him to accept her existence is because she needs it, and therefore uses that as an argument for why he shouldn't believe in her. But if you flip that around again, turn the chessboard around, if you empathize with that situation, what if Battler in episode 1 was able to take the step of going, what must it be to be a person who needs people to believe in you to have your existence? Especially if you have a person who decides that they deny your existence. That seems real shit, yeah. Seems very precarious and unfortunate. Battler can only spin the chessboard to face an adversary and try to outthink their trickery. He's not spinning the chessboard, as we've said before, to empathize with their situation. And then a brief final note in the tea party. Reading the descriptions of George, Maria, and Jessica being turned red and looking strange and seeming like the remnants of meat hits different when you know they've all been blown up in an explosion. It's rough shit. And also hits different knowing that Battler did survive, and he is not affected by the magic going away. Now, first time reading, I assume yes, that's because he's like playing the game and Beatrice is keeping him. But this time, I think it is a reflection of the fact that his body does survive. So in the question mark tea party, wrapping back around to a thing I talked about before, Beatrice, Bern Castell, and Lady Lambda Delta all have different powers. Their powers express in different ways, and they're to do with odds and outcomes and certainty. There's a funny rock, paper, scissors situation going on, where Lambda Delta has the power to make something happen without fail, bring things to almost perfect certainty. Bern Castell has the power to find an outcome, as long as the outcome's odds are not literally 0%. We will see that later when Bernkastel finds the fragment containing the lion. A not impossible, but exceedingly improbable situation. But more important to our purposes here, she talks about Beatrice's power. Specifically when discussing Beatrice's power, Bernkastel talks about her never letting the dice fall from her hand. So whatever the roll might have been, Beatrice is never disappointed. Whatever the roll the dice show her, she is satisfied, without fail. In this context, this reads to me as a lot being about Beatrice knowing the ultimate fate of things. Beatrice's power lies in the fact that there is a mystery box inside of which you do not know what happens. No one can figure out what happens in there. You only know what results come out at the other end. And that is Beatrice's favourite, because anything could have happened in that box, and no one could truly know, and that's what mystifies people, specifically Battler, and maddens him as he attempts to puzzle it out. As a follow-up line, Bernkastel saying, "Inside of you there is nothing but zero," is deeply sad. And I don't think I've really said it explicitly, but Beatrice is my favourite character. Justice for Beatrice. I enjoyed the end Bernkastel giving some tips to the player/battler. Probably a meaningless distinction in this specific case. I love the line, "Her existence is a personification of the rules of this world." Seeing that the first time really threw me for a loop because I thought there was some strange concept of Beatrice purely being a construct, which is a strange thing to try and puzzle out as a person with motivations and feelings. But in my head, I'd almost suggest you could say it the other way around. Beatrice has constructed a game board that is representative of her identity. It is a game board about cat boxes. It is a game board about mysteries and misdirection and uncertainty that people cannot explain. Beatrice has constructed a game with the aim of getting Battler to understand who she is, and it's going to take him a long time to get there. And it's going to take us a long time to get there too. That is the end of my final spoiler video for episode 1. Given that this took me 18 weeks, let me do some quick math. It's going to take me 2.5 years to do the other 7 episodes. So, especially with short breaks in between episodes, gonna give it a 3-year runtime for this whole thing. And so I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of it, especially when I know all of the Higurashi spoilers. Thank you for watching along with all these videos. I'm looking forward to the next 7 sets of them. I hope you're enjoying too. See you next time.